नमस्कार, मैं आनंद कुमार खत्री। आज के हमारे लेक्चर का विषय है बायोस्फीयर पार्ट सेकेंड। रिसोर्सेज ऑफ द बायोस्फीयर, द फ्लो ऑफ एनर्जी, द फोटोसिंथेटिक प्रोसेसेस। Life on Earth depends on the harnessing of solar energy by the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthetic plants convert solar energy into the chemical energy of living tissue, and that stored chemical energy flows into herbivores, predators, parasites, decomposers, and all other forms of life. In the photosynthetic processes, light energy is absorbed by the chlorophyll molecules of plants to convert carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates and oxygen gas. Protein, fats, nucleic acids, and other compounds also synthesized during the processes, as long as elements such as nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus are available. Efficiency of solar energy utilization. Most solar energy occurs at wavelengths unsuitable for photosynthesis. Between 98 and 99% of solar energy reaching the earth is reflected from leaves and other surfaces and absorbed by other molecules, which convert it to heat. Thus, only 1 to 2% is available to be captured by plant. The rate of which plant photosynthesize depends on the amount of light reaching the leaves, the temperature of the environment, and the availability of water and the other nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus. The measurement of the rate at which organisms converts light energy or inorganic chemical energy to the chemical energy of organic compound is called primary productivity. Hence, the total amount of energy assimilated by plants in an ecosystem during photosynthesis, gross primary productivity, varies among environment. Productivity is often measured by an increase in biomass atom used to refer to the weight of all living organisms in an area. Biomass is reported in grams or metric tons. Much of the energy assimilated by plants through photosynthesis is not stored as organic material, but instead is used during cellular respiration. In these processes, organic compounds such as carbohydrate, proteins, and fats are broken down or oxidized to provide energy in the form of ATP for the cell's metabolic needs. The energy not used in the process is stored in plant tissue for further uses and is called net primary productivity. About 40 to 85% of gross primary productivity is not used during respiration and become net primary productivity. The highest net primary productivity in terrestrial environment occurs in swamps and marshes and tropical rainforests. The lowest occur in the desert. In aquatic environment, the highest net primary productivity occurs in estuaries, algal beds, reefs. Consequently, these environments are especially critical for the maintenance of worldwide biological productivity. Energy transfers and pyramids. A small amount of energy stored in plants between 5 and 25% passes into herbivores, plant eaters, as they feed, and a similarly small percentage of the energy in herbivores then passes into the carnivorous animal eater. The result is a pyramid of energy, with most energy concentrated in the photosynthetic organism at the bottom of the food chain and less energy at each higher trophic level, a division based on the main nutritional source of the organism. Some of the remaining energy does not passes directly into the plant, herbivore, carnivore food chain, but instead is delivered into the detritus food chains. Bacteria, fungi, scavengers, and carrion eaters that consume detritus, detritivores are all eventually consumed by the other organisms. The rate at which these consumers convert the chemical energy of their food into their own biomass is called secondary productivity. The efficiency at which energy is transferred from one trophic level to another is called ecological efficiency. On average, it is estimated that there is only a 10% transfer of energy. Figure 2. This is the transfer of energy through an ecosystem. At each trophic level, only a small proportion of energy, approximately 10%, is transferred to the next level. Energy is lost in several ways as it flows along these pathways of consumption. Most plant tissue is uneaten by herbivores, and this stored energy is therefore lost to the plant herbivorous carnivores food chain. In terrestrial community, less than 10% of plant tissue is actually consumed by the herbivores. The rest fall into the detritus pathway. Although the detritivores consumes only some of these decaying tissue, oil and coal deposits are major repositories of this unused plant energy and have accumulated over long periods of geologic time. The efficiency by which animals convert the food they ingest into energy for growth and reproduction is called assimilation energy. Herbivores assimilate between 15 to and 80% of the plant material they ingest, depending on their physiological and the part of the plant they eat. For example, herbivores that eat seeds and young vegetations high in energy have the highest assimilation efficiency. Those that eat older leaves have intermediate efficiency, and those that feed on decaying wood have very low efficiency. Carnivores generally have higher assimilation efficiency than herbivores, often between 60 and 90%, because their food is more easily digested. The overall productivity of the biosphere is therefore limited by the rate at which plant converts solar energy, about 1%, into chemical energy, and the subsequent efficiency at which other organisms at higher trophic level convert that stored energy into their own biomass, approximately 10%. Human induced changes in net primary productivity in the part of the biosphere and that have the highest productivity, such as sterile and tropical moist forests, are likely to have large effects on the overall biological productivity of the earth. Nutrient cycling. The cells of all organisms are made up of primarily of 6 major elements that occurs in similar proportion in all life forms. These elements, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus and sulfur, form the core protoplasm of the organism, and the first 4 of these elements make up about 99% of the mass of most cells. Additional elements, however, are also essential to the growth of the organisms. Calcium and other elements help to form cellular support structures such as cells, internal or external skeleton, and cell wall, etc. Chlorophyll molecules, which allow photosynthetic plants to convert solar energy into chemical energy, are chains of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen compounds built around a magnesium ion. Altogether, 16 elements are found in all organisms. Another 8 elements are found in some organisms but not in others. These bioelements combine with one another to form a wide variety of chemical compounds. They occur in organisms in a higher proportion than they do in the environment because organisms capture them, concentrating and combining them in various ways in their cells, and release them during metabolism and death. As a result, these essential nutrients alternate between inorganic and organic states as they rotate through their respective biogeochemical cycles. These cycles can include all or other part of the following: the atmosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere. A proportion A portion of the elements are bound up in limestone and the minerals of other rocks and are unavailable to organisms. The slow processes of weathering and erosion eventually release these elements to enter the cycle. For most of the major nutrients, however, organisms not only intercept the elements moving through the biosphere, but they actually drive the biogeochemical cycles. This is the general path of the energy flow in the biosphere. The movement of the nutrients through the biosphere is different from the transfer of energy, because whereas energy flows through the biosphere and cannot be used, elements are recycled. The same atoms of carbon or nitrogen may, over the course of eons, move repeatedly between organisms, the atmosphere, the soil, and the ocean. Carbon released as carbon dioxide by an animal may remain in the atmosphere for 5 or 10 years before being taken up by another organism, or it may cycle almost immediately back into a neighboring plant and be used during photosynthesis. The carbon cycle. Life is built on the conversion of carbon dioxide into the carbon-based organic compounds of living organisms. The carbon cycle illustrates the central importance of the carbon in the biosphere. Different parts of the path of the carbon cycle recycle the elements of varying rates. The slower part of the cycle involves carbon that resides in sedimentary rocks, where most of the Earth's carbon is stored. When in contact with water that is acidic, pH is low, carbon will dissolve from bedrock. Under neutral condition, carbon will precipitate out as sediment such as calcium carbonate, limestone. This cycling between solution and precipitation is the background against which more rapid part of the cycle occur. Short-term cycling of carbon occurs in the continual physical exchange of carbon dioxide CO2 between the atmosphere and hydrosphere. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere becomes dissolved in water H2O, with which it reacts to form carbonic acid H2CO3, which dissociates into hydrogen ion H plus and HCO3 minus bicarbonate ion, which further dissociates into the hydrogen and carbonate ion CO3 2 minus. The more alkaline the water, pH above 7.0 alkaline, the more carbon is present in the form of carbonate, and this is showing in this equation. CO2 plus H2O, H2CO3, this dissociates in H plus and HCO3 minus, and this further dissociates in 2H plus and HCO3 2 minus. At the same time, carbon dioxide in the water is continually lost to the atmosphere. The exchange of the carbon between the atmosphere and hydrosphere links the remaining parts of the cycle, which are the exchanges that occur between the atmosphere and the terrestrial forms and between water and aquatic organisms. The biological cycling of carbon begins as photosynthetic organism assimilates carbon dioxide or carbonates from the surrounding environment in terrestrial communities. Plants convert atmospheric carbon dioxide to carbon-based compounds through photosynthesis. During this process, plants cleave the carbon from the two oxygen molecules and release the oxygen back into the surrounding environment. Plants are thus primarily responsible for the presence of atmospheric oxygen, and at aquatic communities, plants are use dissolved carbon in the form of carbonate or carbon dioxide as the source of carbon for photosynthesis. Once carbon has been assimilated for photosynthetic organism as well as by the animal that eat, then it is released again in the form of carbon dioxide as these organisms respire. The release of the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere or hydrosphere completes the biological part of the carbon cycle. The pathway of the global cycle, carbon cycle, however, are never completely balanced. That is to say, carbon does not move in and out of all part of the biosphere at equal rate. Consequently, over time, some part of the biosphere accumulates more carbon than others, thereby serving as major accessible carbon reservoir. In pre-industrial time, the major reservoir of carbon were the deep and shallow portion of the ocean, the soil, detritus, and biota of the land, and the atmosphere. The ocean were and still are the greatest reservoir of carbon because marine phytoplanktons have such short life cycle. The carbon in the ocean cycle rapidly between inorganic and organic state. In terrestrial environment, forests are the largest carbon reservoir. Up to 80% of the above ground carbon in terrestrial communities and about a third of below ground carbon are contained with forest. Unlike the ocean, much of this carbon is stored directly in the tissues of plants. High latitude forest includes large amount of carbon and not only in above ground vegetables but also in the peat deposits. Forests at high and low latitude particularly are important reservoirs of carbon. An estimated one half of the carbon in forest occurs in high latitude forest and a little more than one third occurs in the low latitude forest. The two largest forest reservoirs of carbon are the vast expanses in Russia, which hold roughly 25% of the world's forest carbon, and the Amazon basin, which contains about 20%. Until recent centuries, the equilibrium between the carbon in the world's forest and in the atmosphere remained constant. Samples of carbon dioxide trapped in the ice during the past 1,000 years and direct measurement of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had remained fairly constant until the 18th century. However, the cutting of much of the world's forest is, along with the increase in consumption of fossil fuel attendant on the industrial revolution, has resulted in a disruption of the balance between the amount of carbon dioxide in the forest and in the atmosphere. The concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide has been increasingly steadily. Currently, the rate of the increase is about 4% per decade. If human activities continue to alter the relative size of the carbon reservoir worldwide, they are likely to have large effect on the carbon cycle and other biogeochemical cycles. Large-scale deforestation in Russia and in the Amazon basin are likely to have particularly significant effect on global carbon storage and cycling. The warming of global temperature also is changing, with which ecosystems act as a long-term sink for carbon and which act as source for carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. For example, the Arctic tundra, with large amount of carbon stored in its soil, had been a net sink for carbon dioxide during long period of geologic time. The recent warming of many Arctic regions, however, has accelerated the rate of soil decomposition, transforming these Arctic area into potential source of atmospheric carbon dioxide. The complex cycle of carbon and the varying sizes of the carbon reservoir illustrate some of the reasons it has been so difficult to predict the effect that increased atmospheric carbon will have on global change. Thanks.